Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're glad you're able to join us. My name's Claire Hobby. I'm the Director of Purchaser Engagement at TCO Development. And today is part one of our two-part mini-series focusing on circular IT in practice. And I know probably most of you on the line today have at least heard of the circular economy, maybe looked at some of the principles and models around a more circular approach to the products that we buy. But today we thought, let's take a leap beyond the models, beyond the loops and theories, and talk about some really on the ground, ready to use practical solutions, particularly for IT products. Because we know models are great, criteria are great, but it's us, the users and the buyers, that can really make products more circular throughout the life cycle. So let's go ahead. I'm going to do a brief introduction about some of the principles of the circular economy related to IT, how TCO certified and our latest generation are taking steps in that direction with our new set of criteria. Then it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our two guest speakers today. First, we'll hear from Joost de Klover from Closing the Loop. He's going to talk about their exciting one-to-one mobile phone program. And then following Joost, we're welcoming Steve Haskew from Circular Computing and their solution for enterprise-grade remanufactured computers. So for those of you who may not be familiar with TCO Certified, just an overview, and I know many of you have seen this before. So TCO Certified is a global sustainability certification for our IT products, and we handle social and environmental responsibility through our criteria. So the certification is used by IT purchasers as well as industry worldwide to both set relevant, up-to-date criteria for buying more sustainable IT products, and by industry for structuring their sustainability work in accordance with purchaser demand. TCO Certified is an independent certification in accordance with ISO 14024, which means we have independent verification and criteria are developed in a multi-stakeholder process. We have criteria for 8 product categories, with over 3,000 certified models representing 22 plus brands, and those numbers change every day. So I would highly recommend take a look at our product finder at tcocertified.com, and you can search by brand or product and see what's out there. Our latest news is that we launched our latest generation, Generation 8, in December of 2018. Focus areas for our new generation really fall into 3 buckets. Firstly, and what we're going to be talking a little bit more about today, is a more circular approach to IT products. And by that we mean really focusing on extending their life, extending their use phase, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We also take a continued and expanded look at supply chain responsibility and transparency, so things like factory social conditions, factory auditing and verifying those results and fixing the problems in the supply chain, as well as supporting the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in the area of sustainable consumption and production. So let's dive straight in and talk about this big problem of e-waste, which is really closely connected to the concept of a circular approach to IT products. Right now, we're generating globally about 50 million metric tons of e-waste every year. And we can tell by this curve that that trend is set to continue, so that by 2030, there's an estimated 90 million tons per year if we continue at the pace we're on today. And of this, globally, only about 13% of the e-waste we generate is recycled. It's kind of alarming numbers to think about, and obviously not sustainable. So what happens to the electronic products that we use but no longer need at the end of their life? We can think of this in terms of a waste hierarchy. So right up the top, we've got what we should be prioritizing, which is servicing the products, maintaining them, and then moving a little bit further down to reuse and refurbish. But way at the bottom, we've got this massive base of just waste. Still, a lot of the products we use today are ending up in landfill, being illegally exported. Some are being recycled, but we really need to think about actually inverting this pyramid so that the focus is much more on servicing and maintaining the products we already have. So if we take that idea of the pyramid and think about how the product life cycle looks today, and then we're really looking at what's called a linear economy. You might have heard from the take, waste and dispose model, and that's really what a bulk of our products fall under today, from extracting raw materials through to part supply, manufacturing processes, distribution, until it gets to us, the user. And then we're done with it. Still far too many of these products are ending up as waste, only to be replenished by products that, again, start at that extracting raw materials phase and again work their way down to the waste stream. And this is what we need to change by thinking in a more circular way, basically cutting out that whole waste phase altogether. This is the long-term vision. We're not there yet. And like most sustainability concepts, we really need to think long-term. The goal is to really keep materials and products in circulation longer, and not only keep them in circulation, but keep them in circulation at their highest value. And for IT products, that really means keeping them as close to the user as we possibly can. And we do that by focusing on items such as service, maintenance, and extending their lifespan. And then, of course, we have the complementary loops, if you like, of refurbishing, parts harvesting, and of course recycling. But we want to gradually move these loops in towards the user so that we're not continuing to encroach on natural resources and contribute to emissions and environmental degradation. So this is the way we really want to think long-term, moving the loops closer towards service and longer use. So models are great. We understand the loops. So let's kick right into talking about some practical things that are actually being done to bring about this reality, not only in the marketplace itself, but also from the perspective of criteria that we have put into place as part of TCO Certified Generation 8. And I just wanted to give a quick snapshot of some steps we've taken to put some of those criteria into the certification. We're looking specifically at product lifetime extension, again, keeping the products close to the user. So some of the criteria we've put in place include criteria for replaceable components, standardized connectors, that means including the new USB-C connector, making it easier to share products with other users and pass them on. Product durability we've looked at, so drop testing, temperature testing, battery longevity and replaceability, very important, as well as something that's very close to most purchasers' concerns, and that's secure data removal, allowing buyers and larger organisations to move product on to other users without being concerned for the integrity and confidentiality of the data. So that's a brief snapshot of some things we're doing in the scope of TCO Certified, and also giving you some ideas about how to just start thinking about the circular economy connected to the IT devices you use. With that, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our first guest speaker, Joost de Clever, who is the Director of Closing the Loop. Thanks, Joost. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Claire. Great intro, and thanks, of course, also to TCO Certified for setting up this webinar on a very important topic, which I'm lucky to be active in for quite some years now. My name is Joost de Kluiver. I run a company that's called Closing the Loop. If you'll forgive me for doing some self-promo first, it's a concept and company that has been promoted by the International Telecommunications Union and GSMA, the overarching telecom organization, as a pioneer on circularity for phone usage. I'm quite happy to talk a little bit about the topic of today, circularity for IT. If you see that circularity is a topic that is clearly on a lot of agendas, government, but also large organizations, maybe even for to some extent for individuals and consumers. It is unfortunately also quite clear that circularity is a bit of a abstract and sometimes difficult to define topic. Next slide, I'm showing that actually it is sometimes a bit of a utopic discussion. For example, in my country, the Netherlands, the government refers to circularity as a goal that we would like to reach in 2050, where there's no longer any waste and all metals and products are being used properly and to their full extent. Something we should and could very much support, but it's also something to that is quite challenging to turn into practice. And I think, especially if you look at the IT industry, it is an industry that looks for tangible, no-nonsense solutions that should be also applicable for individuals and individual companies. So next slide shows that actually the reality for electronics, and this is just one product, the one that I focus on specifically, mobile phones, shows that it is extremely challenging to make a phone circular. It will require a lot of parts in the value chain, producers, sellers, distributors, but also sometimes companies that are very difficult to get on board for circularity because it's just not a topic that is too much of their concern at present. Getting them all on board to make, if you will, a circular phone, you understand and agree that's quite a challenging thing to do. So even though that's clearly something we would want in the future, we do also need to do something now. And I feel that it is very rewarding to see that there actually are quite a lot of solutions that that you are able to apply at this moment. So the one that my company developed is is quite realistic and called one for one, as Claire just mentioned. It's needed because it is indeed a clear problem. E-waste building up to huge numbers around the world, 2 billion phones being produced annually. But it is also something we cannot change overnight. We cannot stop using phones. A lot of companies will have a lot of difficulties if their employees cannot use any phones. It will be, as I mentioned, quite complex to demand for completely sustainable phones because unfortunately there aren't any at the moment. So what we need is a practical and also realistic first step to show that you as a buyer is interested in the topic of circularity, mean business, but also to make that interest, that ambition tangible, to make it realistic and to make it actionable. So the next slide shows that our service, which we call one for one, is based on two quite familiar concepts. I would say the concept of carbon offsetting and extended producer responsibility are used globally, definitely in my country used quite a lot. And I'd say that the idea behind, for example, carbon offsetting is very good. If you fly a plane, you emit some CO2 and then you can plant a tree. So the idea of you pollute, you pay, I think makes a lot of sense. What is a bit more challenging is that when you fly a plane and you emit CO2, that would require the planting of a tree. So I think if you look at it from a tangible and understandable point of view, it's not the most ideal solution. But we used that concept and made it very practical and turned it into something we call one for one. The basic idea then is that when you buy mobile phones, which is shown here on the next slide, which of course happens every day, it is also a fact that that will require metals that are mined in majority in emerging markets, where gold, silver, copper and other materials are extracted from soil to produce the electronics that we use every day. So again, it would be great if that's not needed, but the reality is that this type of material usage will go on for the short future. What we believe will be a good way to actually deal with the fact that we reuse metals is if we could bring back the same quantity of metals or materials that are used when you buy a phone. So the very simple proposition that we developed is called 1 for 1, and it's about when you buy one phone, which, as I mentioned, will require some materials to produce that phone, you also recycle one phone. We recycle and collect this phone from African countries where electronic waste, unfortunately, in majority is not being recycled at the moment. You can imagine that if you take out one phone that would otherwise be landfilled, have that phone recycled, and then the metals are extracted and used again for a variety of purposes, that recycled phone can actually offset the phone that you as a buyer is buying, and making that new phone material neutral. So it's a concept based on carbon offsetting, but actually we call it making a phone material neutral. So a proposition perfect for the green procurement, for example. So next slide is one that focuses on a second situation which happens quite a lot. Mobile phones are reused, and it's clearly something we should support. Mobile phones are unfortunately used for just a short period, for example, in European countries, sometimes for 1.5 years or even shorter, meaning that these phones that could be reused are not used to their full extent if they end up in a drawer, for example. So when a phone gets a second life, we very much encourage that. However, what we do see is that when a phone gets this second life, this often, in actually majority, means that this phone is shipped to emerging markets. Again, that's not a problem, because if you see that, for example, a second-hand Samsung or Nokia phone can be used still for several years in a developing country and adding a lot of value locally, it's just something we should very much support. What we as Closing the Loop do is make sure that that reuse is done in a, as we would say, closed loop way. So yes, reuse is great, and again, also if it happens in Asian or African markets, but it is even better if it's done in a waste-free way, meaning for one phone that our customers sell on the second-hand market, and as a result will end up perhaps in African countries, in majority they simply cannot be traced. We collect one scrap phone in a country that doesn't facilitate electronics recycling, and the reuse program as a result becomes waste-free. We make sure that the disposal of your phones doesn't lead to more electronic waste in emerging markets. So the key thing that's needed, and that's, I would say, the skill of Closing Loop, is the collection of electronic waste. We've been doing this since 2012, focusing, as I mentioned, on emerging markets, specifically African countries, where we now collected over 2 million phones, working together with local partners, for example, in countries like Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda, where we educate local collection networks, work with businessmen and women to establish these collection networks, and make sure, of course, that all of the waste that is being collected is properly stored, and that's unfortunately quite a challenging topic on its own, being shipped to proper recyclers. So, for example, from Uganda to recyclers in Europe or in the US. Unfortunately, there aren't any proper recyclers in the whole of the African continent. So what we do is bringing this electronic waste, which indeed is a huge global challenge, bring it to proper recyclers, making sure that the waste is actually turned into income for local communities, turning it into materials that can be used again for the production of a variety of products, for example, electronics. and making sure that we actually contribute to more circularity in the IT industry. So that's in its own, of course, a great thing that more sustainability, more circularity is promoted. But what's very key for us is that it's not just about, again, this abstract concept of circularity or sustainability. It's about really contributing to the goals and benefits of our customers. And these definitely are for a large part commercial goals. So we see that our partners that include telecom companies like T-Mobile are using this service of offsetting as a way to service their customers, who are in majority asking now for IT to be more sustainable. So this service, Circular Telecom, is actually contributing to sales for our partners. But it's more than just a service. It's also a way to educate stakeholders, for example, employees or government relationships that you might have, educating them on what you as an organization are doing, that you're actually using your IT policy to also contribute to practical circularity. Clearly, marketing and sustainability are topics that are also related to what we're doing. So we very much support the fact that our concept is used as a story towards getting more people motivated to use IT in a way that's more sustainable and reduces waste. So marketing and communication is also key. And lastly, I would say compliance, maybe not at this moment a topic because there aren't that many laws making our service obligatory, but we are definitely seeing a lot of movement on the EU level to becoming more active as an IT buyer and as an IT seller or producer to take some sort of responsibility also on a global level for the products that you're buying or using. So as Claire just mentioned, it's quite clear that circularity and bringing products, keeping them close to the user, making sure their life is extended as long as possible, that these topics are something we should all aim for, because a waste-free telecom industry, which is our own mission as a company, is something we should, we will clearly all encourage. But what we need now is something that is connected to everyday behavior. So what we need is to turn this ambition and this end goal into something that's value for our network, for you as a buyer. And if you look at the next tab here, also a value for the collection network. So effectively, Closing Loop is turning electronic waste into social value, into circular value by producing these very clean metals such as gold and silver out of our electronic waste, but also clearly commercial value, making sure that our customers use the proposition as is depicted here in this infographic that we made for T-Mobile, use it for their commercial gains as well. So that's a topic that's important for us, thank you, but indeed the next slide, but also for our customers. So just to describe a few examples that we are working on here in the Netherlands, for example, for Schiphol, an airport that is quite active on the topic of circularity, and again has described some very ambitious goals, but has struggled to some extent to get their employees on board for this topic. So again, the employee of, for example, this organization will still use mobile phones, and it's something that will, and we wouldn't want to change on the short term, but adding our service, so really just seeing our service as an added proposition, not as something that will require current processes or current contracts to be changed overnight, but really adding our service to the current process of procurement has allowed also Schiphol to become turn this well, I would say, a very visible product of a mobile phone into also a product that educates the workforce on this ambition that the organization has on circularity. So very practically, it meant that this company bought around 1,000 phones for their employees. Some 2,000 phones were actually reused, and the purchase was made material neutral by collecting also 1,000 phones on behalf of Schiphol, and some 2,000 phones that were reused got a second life in a waste-free manner, meaning that we resold them on the second-hand market and made sure that the same quantity of phones were taken out of emerging markets, preventing them from ending up in a landfill. So next case is one that shows that it's not just about closing the loop working for individual customers or individual companies. It's also something that municipalities use, for example, the city of Amsterdam. And I think what's very interesting about this case is that it also shows that it's a proposition that our partners can use. Centralpoint being a large IT distributor or reseller in the Benelux region, which has clearly received a lot of questions from their customers, be it governments, but in majority also nowadays large organizations, wanting also their IT procurement policy to contribute to these, again, overarching goals of more sustainable business. So in a collaboration between our partner Centralpoint and given the need of this municipality, the city of Amsterdam, to turn their ambition around circular procurement and green procurement into tangible results, we actually created a proposition together with Centralpoint, making it very easy for the city of Amsterdam to apply our service, because they were just working with the same organization that they had all along, Centralpoint again, and just adding our concept as an add-on in the process that they would otherwise also follow. So the collaboration, I feel, is very powerful for us when the standard or regular suppliers also come on board. That this is not a concept that we should just pitch to individual customers. It's a concept, the circular concept, that we should pitch to the industry as a whole. So next slide shows that this is really what our vision is about. Mobile phones are great products. Our employees use them every day. We need them for everyday business. And I would say they're really the product of the 21st century. But they can also be, and definitely it will require a lot of innovation for this to happen, but they can also be an icon of circularity. But what's needed for companies like ours, and what I very much encourage buyers like you to do, is to ask your suppliers to come up with practical, tangible solutions, so that the companies that are working on this field will be approached and get the opportunity to actually present their services to buyers around the world. So I'm very much hoping to also work with many more companies in Europe to really make mobile phones an icon of circularity. And I think that was my last slide for now. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Joost. Wow, a great, very inspirational but very practical solution that we can all learn some more about, and managing to combine environmental and social sustainability with business outcomes as well. So thank you so much for that. Just a couple of admin notes before we move over to Steve. You'll see in the GoToWebinar panel, there's a questions tab. So if you have any questions, I'm sure there are a lot, feel free to enter your question in there. We will hopefully get a few minutes at the end of the presentations to address a couple of questions. Moving right along, I want to introduce our next speaker, Steve Haskew, who's the Strategic Commercial Manager at Circular Computing. Without further ado, over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Claire. Before I jump in, I would like to thank Claire and the team at TCO for putting on this webinar. These are so important to help get the message deep and wide throughout the world. So I'm very grateful, and to you, Just, for a really interesting and engaging presentation. So my name's Steve Haskew. I'm a strategic commercial manager at Circular Computing. So what I want to do is just give you a snapshot at the business. We'll also show you a small case study and give you some reasoning as to why it's important that the business users grab hold of circularity as a core part of their IT strategy. So Circular Computing is a brand of a parent called A2C Services. A2C currently has 250 people working in 3 countries. We were established pre-internet, meaning that when the mainframe was transforming over to the PC, the laptop, which became obviously the tablet and the mobile phone, we were part of that remarketing part of the IT upgrade. So we have 25 years experience of being semi-circular, if you like. And as you mentioned earlier on, when we were selling product up until about 2 or 3 years ago, the go-to place for the second-hand market would have been the emerging economies. What we have found since then, about 2013, 2014, is that laptop products are as thin and as fast as they need to be, mainly because they need to disperse of the heat. Anything thinner than a laptop will be a tablet or a hybrid. So what we did, we invested substantial funds from our own cash pile into a remanufacturing facility that is the world's first secondary equipment manufacturing facility. So what we're able to do is to take enterprise grade laptops that we select carefully. We remanufacture them, including a full respray, a new battery that we have an agreement with Duracell. We change critical components, we reassemble the product, fitted with a new screen, a new keyboard, and so forth, and deliver it back into what could be the same donor client, if you like, with a 3-year warranty through a reseller channel that you know and trust. So we're currently in the scale and grow stages of our business, and a big part of the true value, other than the product's fantastic, is that we do invest a large part of our profits into sustainability projects that help connect the corporate user, their SDG agenda, their own code of conduct. It aligns everything quite cleverly, and it's just a laptop product that everybody needs to use. So rather than looking at the circular relooping, which Houston and Claire did a great job of doing, I thought about focusing on the drivers, the things that are going to make the difference, and the reason why people will need to move to a circular economy business model. So if you consider on the left-hand side of this slide the population explosion, so we've gone from 3 billion in 1966, so to over 7 billion currently, and on the way to 10 billion. And this population, in the main, in the developed countries, albeit, have adopted, particularly with technology, a take, make, use, and dispose behaviour. And it's that behaviour that actually needs to change. What we're seeing and what we'll see accelerated is a shortening of natural resources, which of course will spotlight a price instability, meaning that there will be more demand than there is supply. And we're seeing evidence of that right now. What we do know for sure is that the climate change is real, global warming is happening, the IT industry is deemed to be 3% of total global CO2 output. So we have a responsibility to have a smarter IT strategy. What this is inevitably leading to is mass migration of humans, animals, insects, and disease, and there's extinction of wildlife, which I think is a terrible thing personally. And the linear buying behavior obviously creates huge stockpiles of e-waste, which is unnecessary in our life. We we see 160,000 laptops disposed of daily in the EU, and that's supported by our work with the UN University. We don't have the data for the US, but given the size of the continent and the population, we expect it to be about the same. So let's say 250,000 laptops disposed of every day in those two countries, much of which will end up on the e-waste, 70% of which can be reused, we believe. So what's the problem? Okay, so I've broken this down into six key topics. So we know there's 160 million laptops made every year. That trend doesn't look like it's going to thin out. It looks fairly stable, give or take a few percentage points. One thing we do know is there's about 2.5 tons of ore required to make a laptop, and we use 50,000 gallons of water per laptop. It's a very intense process. With the production of the laptop, it kicks out 650 pounds, which is about 380 kilos in decimal money of carbon dioxide per laptop in the production process. There is, of course, e-waste. There's known conflict mining. It's a very delicate and a complex environment in the supply chain of new. One thing we don't say is don't buy new or don't buy technology. We recognise there is a requirement for new product to be as part of the evolution process. There just has to be a better way, we feel. There's no pollution in our process, and we have a very ethical supply chain. So from a social point of view, if we click, we use a laptop product every day. But just to highlight the social imbalance, the bottom of the supply chain in the mining of minerals, as we know, there's a lot of conflict, particularly in the DRC. It's complicated, and we're glad to see people like the EICC or RBA are working alongside the very large OEMs to grab hold of this problem. If we could click again. Thank you. We use the product that the minerals are mined, and then when we dispose of the product, a very similar social set, maybe Agbogbloshie in Ghana, it could be Hong Kong, could be China. They will remove the minerals from the circuit boards that can't be reused, and they'll create an income from that. And on the one hand, it creates income, and on the other hand, it's in really poor working conditions. So not to harbour on those two things, but using circular computers doesn't work like that. A quick case study we did with a schools department in the US. They were using some Apple product, Apple Inc. Laptops. They were already 9 years old. They had 15,000 of them. They were doomed going to an e-waste site. They were sourced from Los Angeles, in the USA. We were able to collect, transport them, remanufacture them, and then we had a distribution partners throughout the EU that were able to remarket them, avoiding a huge e-waste problem. Now that we would see as a semi-circular environment, and that's sort of our day-to-day business. So typically, this is how we operate. We'll take a 3 to 4 year old ex-lease laptop. They're enterprise grade, so they come out of PLC or public sector. They'll go through a 5-hour remanufacturing process. It's very labour intensive. On the one side, that's very good in terms of it creates jobs, but it's just to demonstrate that this is not a spit and lick kind of polishing environment. This is a thorough industrial process where we replace critical components. We work with the BSI 8887. In fact, I'm a member on one of the steering committees that looks at how remanufacturing should work, and we work within the constraints of that organisation. And what it does, it provides to the user consistent, unrivaled quality in the volumes that they need to be able to make an IT strategy that works for them. Whereas the second-hand world is very hit and miss, with 1 of this, 10 of that, 15 of the other. It was very difficult for large corporate to make an IT strategy based on a very mixed IT asset base, but we managed to fix that problem. We put a 3-year warranty on it. After 3 years, we'll guarantee to buy that product back, whether that's through a finance company or whether it's off the asset register of the corporate client. It'll go back into our remanufacturing plant, and around we go again. And one of the interesting points that Claire made earlier actually was, a reuse or extending the life. Or we hear a lot about people, we sweat our assets for maybe 4 years or 5 years, is the right thing. But you wouldn't use your car without putting it in for a service maybe every year or every 6 months if you're a heavy user. And it just sort of made me think about, what's it going to take for the world to accept that you can't just use a piece of technology for 3 years, particularly a laptop product. If it's stationary, not such a problem, like a desktop or a monitor or even a TV that's mounted on the wall. But if you have a mobile product that's thrown around a lot, it stands to reason that you need to get that serviced, and that service could be part of a remanufacturing process. So the benefit from the Los Angeles project was we saved 25,000 tons of material from being extracted. Here's a big number. We saved 323 million litres of water from having to be used. That's going to become more of a driver as water becomes scarce. 5,500 metric tons of CO2 was prevented from being blown to the atmosphere. That at the moment is a critical thing for us. 45 tons of e-waste, and then obviously there's no conflict mining, no pollution, and no human rights abuses. So other than the unnecessary carbon emissions, water consumption, e-waste, and unethical supply, why should you care? Okay, I'll put this together to try and help me explain. What we have are basically 3 boxes, A, B, C. In box A is global population. As we discussed, it's in 1960 it was 3 billion. It's over 7 billion now. In box B is predicted by Statista, the Internet of Things, from 2020 at 30 billion, or just over, in the next plus 5 years to 2025 to 70.4 billion. Each of those Internet of Things, unless science takes a diversion, will require a lithium-ion battery or another science of technology. But let's just say it's a lithium-ion battery. A critical component of the lithium-ion battery is cobalt. And if you want proof that pricing has gone up, in the last 2 years, it was at 20,000 a ton in 2020, and it currently trades at just under $80,000 a ton. So it's a 4-fold increase, which is either borne by you, the user, or it comes out of the profits of the supply chain who are going to sell to you, or it's hidden away in some other fashion. But if that's just cobalt, then you won't be surprised to hear that technology is increasing in value. And I think you just need to look towards the modern Apple iPhone, which is $1,000 to buy, whereas maybe 3 or 4 years ago it was $300 or $400. This is a key driver to circularity. E-waste is very important, but where the user has to pay more money for a similar performing product, that would be the moment that they wake up and say, if I can get the same for less and it offers me more in terms of sustainability, then that's a good enough reason for me to go circular. So what does a 100% all-in mean? Other than be able to provide a remanufacturing platform for you with conditions that are very similar to an original equipment manufacturer, our commitment to sustainability is unrivaled. The second user market is unregulated, and what we've decided to do is to take the stand on what is the minimum standard that you should expect as a client. So as an organization, we are carbon neutral. We've invested significantly in projects around the world that provide us with that, as well as providing a carbon neutral product. Of course, the product already exists on goods in, if you like. So the carbon footprint from its production value has been taken care of on its first life. But what we do, we plant 5 trees for every single laptop that we sell. We're on the way to having commitments to plant in excess of 2.5 million trees. That will be in the US and India. We have a deforestation initiative, meaning that in Zambia, there's a picture at the bottom there of a guy called Samson. Before we came along, he would cut down trees, cut the wood up, sell the wood for money, and then with that money, he would go and trade. And a lot of the farmers in and around Zambia would do the same, creating deforestation. What we've decided to do is to invest in those communities. We have a Bees for Trees project with our investment partner, WeForest, is an NGO in Belgium, where we invest in man-made beehives. Samson and his team will put the beehives into the canopy of the trees. The bees come, they make honey, the honey makes money. They can go and trade with the neighboring village, and then the bees go and pollinate, and it's a win-win for everybody. And we love that project. Additionally, we have renewable energy programs in Turkey, India, and Indonesia. I put that slide together because the SDGs are a real driver, and hopefully they will continue to be so. And we try and align ourselves with as many projects as is commercially viable to ensure a collaborative, commitment-based relationships. So just looking very quickly at the three P's of sustainability, I guess. We deliver enterprise-grade performance hardware for commerce. We guarantee a buyback so we can re-lip and redeploy, keeping the product that you're using out of the e-waste stream. We provide much better total cost of ownership for the IT user, some 40% against new. We provide that with a 3-year no quibble warranty, just from a peace of mind point of view. We're able to tick the sustainable procurement policy criteria. Our product comes to you ethically sourced. There's employee welfare, meaning that your employees or the employees of the large corporates that are buying them get the benefit of our sustainability initiatives. There's some good feeling for the corporate buyer in getting involved in circularity. Clearly, we're resource efficient, we're carbon zero. We have sustainability right at the core of our organisation. And what we're trying to do is link internal and external stakeholders with market-leading initiatives. In the UK, we've launched an education platform that is a sustainability-driven learning module for key stage 2, so that's children aged 7 to 11. Teaching them about the philosophies within sustainability and trying to get them to come up with some solutions. It's not about circular computing. It's just delivered to get some drivers in the homes, and that often leads to a what we call a fridge certificate, which will have things on it like have you turned the taps off, have you turned the heating down, are all the windows closed, and so on, just to get the youth of today thinking. And that in a nutshell, I do think, is my bit over. So I'd like to thank you all very much for giving me the time you've invested in this presentation to speak to you today.
That's great. Thanks, Steve. Great insights into some of the complexities around these issues connected to computers in particular. So thanks for illustrating some of those issues for us. So we're coming up on, we've got a few minutes left, but I do want to take a couple of minutes to get to some of your questions. We may not get to all of them, but we will get to as many as we can. So question for either of you, Steve and Joost. We have a question about if you're seeing much activity in other countries around circular IT, particularly Asia and Australia. The question has come in. Steve, I know you'd pointed out Indonesia and India, but anything else either of you would like to mention there?
I mean, what I would say is that the IT market, our part of the market, has been semi-circular for a long time. So I think we accept that it's what the interpretation of circularity is. If it's keeping the asset in use, then we try and do that for as long as we possibly can. But what I would say is there are more mature markets. In Europe, we have obviously the Dutch and the Benelux region, as well as the Scandinavian regions, have a very a very mature thinking around the concepts of sustainability throughout society, not just at home or the organisation, but it's sort of part of the culture that we don't see around the world.
Okay. I do know from our perspective, at least, Australia has recently, I believe, implemented an e-waste ban. So probably some interest there, looking out for some circular discussions, I would think. Another question, maybe this one for you, Joost. Do you provide any feedback to product manufacturers about ways their phones can be designed or produced to support circularity, such as easy disassembly or refurbishment, for example?
So indeed, good question. I mean, circularity shouldn't be about any individual company stating that we should all become more circular. It should really be a collaborative effort towards getting the whole value chain involved. What I'm mainly seeing is that these organizations, producers, but also other large telecom organizations, are very much looking at trends when it comes to circularity or sustainability. So there is a growing group of consumers that is interested in this, consumers or buyers, B2B buyers. So that is, unfortunately, as simple as it is, that's a big driver for also these organizations to do more sustainable innovations. But when they do, luckily, we also part of that, part of their research. So yes, we are reaching out and have been approached by some phone brands because it is quite a complex topic. Which, if you produce a phone, it doesn't usually mean that you're also good in at producing a circular phone. So I'm quite happy that this topic is being seen also by large phone brands as a topic that we really should take on as society, with innovators on circularity, with NGOs, governments, and others. But it's happening more often nowadays, luckily, than at least 10 years ago.
Thanks, Joost. I think we have time for one more question. If we don't get to your questions today, I'm hoping we can send you an offline answer. And if anyone has a question they don't get answered today, on the screen now you'll see a couple of ways you can feel free to go ahead and contact us with your question directly, or we can go ahead and answer you offline after the webinar. Final question that I think I'm going to pose to both of you guys, and from your perspective, what do you think needs to happen to accelerate some of these activities around a more circular approach and to bring, let's say, your solutions to more scale? Maybe Steve, if you could kick us off with 3 minutes to go.
I'll take less than that. I think to not look too deeply at it. It is a topic that has been around for, say, 25 years, but it's just taking hold today, really, where the drivers are real from a global climate point of view. The solutions are there. You just need to know how they can work with the IT strategy that you adopt. Don't be shy in coming forward. The answers already exist.
Okay. Joost, what about you from your perspective? What do you see as some of the drivers that need to accelerate an implementation of your solution, for example?
Sure. So I think the key thing that I learned in the last month, for example, as well, having visited the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, is that the main driver for circularity or even sustainability to be embraced, if it is seen as something that we work on together. And I'd say that's really the change that luckily I've seen happen in the last 10 years or so, that it used to be a discussion that sustainability was competing with commercial interests, that if you are sustainable, then you're not for profit, or if you are aiming to sell products, then you're not sustainable. What we're now luckily seeing is an increase in business models, but also a change in mindset that sustainable business models exist, that it's completely normal and quite possible to combine your ambitions to contribute to a bit of a better world with still being a business and still applying all of your business needs. So the key thing that we need to do more still is to indeed keep understanding and make sure that that's being applied, that sustainability and business can work together quite well.
Thanks, Joost. And I think in a lot of sustainability topics these days, that's one of our biggest takeaways, that these problems are so complex that we need to work together, whether we're industry or purchasers or whoever we might be. So I think that's a great conclusion. And along those lines, this is a conversation we want to continue with all of you on the line today. So I want to let you know we're planning a second webinar, but this time we're going to be looking at things from the purchaser point of view. So we're going to have a couple of purchasers come in and talk about their approaches to circular IT. We'll get back to you with an exact date and time, but it will be later in April. Great, well, our time is up, but thank you so much everyone for joining us today. Thanks to Joost and Steve for sharing their experiences with us, and go find us at tcocertified.com. We look forward to seeing you again in April. Thanks everybody, bye-bye now.